All right, everyone. So, wanted to dive in here real quick. Nutrition for wrestlers. So, I have a lot of conversations with parents and wrestlers just based on what do I need to eat? How do I eat to maintain my weight? How do we eat for match day? How do I not miss weight? Because, especially with weight class sports, we need to be able to understand um, being able to make weight. So, I've had a lot of these conversations in the past week to 2 weeks and just want to make sure that we kind of have some good info on making weight and being able to understand some of the nutritional aspects that go into making weight and for wrestling. So I put this together, and so we'll kind of go through this just so you can see some of these things, right? So when we look at nutrition management and weight management for wrestling, being able to understand a couple basic tenets. So how much you eat, okay? Because a lot of times people will always say, what foods do I need to eat? Well, we need to tackle calorie balance. So calories in equals calories out will equal weight balance. So if you eat the same amount of energy that you expend, right? Because that's what calories are. Calories are just an energy unit. If you eat the same number of calories you put in or that you put in and you expend that many, you're going to maintain your weight. All right. Calories out, if it's less than the amount of calories you put in, you're going to gain weight. And if then you expend the number of if you expend more calories than what you put in, you're going to lose weight. All right. That bottom one should say weight loss, not weight gain. All right. So we have to understand energy balance right there. So the first priority is calories. We need to understand that quantities and actually understanding how much you eat and how many calories are going into your body, that is going to have a very important impact on weight management. All right. So number one priority is weight management. And the big thing we need to understand is portion control, because a lot of people don't have a very good sense of honesty with how much they control. So done the video on MyFitnessPal and how to track food. Being able to understand tracking your food is going to really impact really knowing how many calories are being put into the body. Okay. So this is something, especially for wrestlers, to be able to track the number of calories that they have, especially over the course of, 5 to 10 days. And we'll talk about how to really look at managing the weight here at the end. But most people either vastly underestimate or vastly overestimate how much they eat. Okay. The number of times we have wrestlers that will actually come in and say, well, I didn't eat anything. And then you actually go through everything throughout the day. Well, I had a piece of pizza for lunch. Did you have one piece of pizza? No, I had 2 pieces of pizza. Okay. Well, that's a 340 calorie difference there, just in that one thing. Did you eat, I had ramen for dinner last night. Well, did you have, 1 serving of ramen, which is half a packet, or did you have 2 servings of ramen, which is a full packet? Oh, you had 2 packets of ramen. So you had 4 servings. All of a sudden we start to see some of that build up. Okay. Now this is the tricky part, and it does take a little bit of effort, but effort on the front end, at least the mental energy of actually measuring out what you eat and how much, and understanding how much you eat, saves, especially for wrestlers, it saves the drastic weight cuts, which is what we want. We don't want to deal with the drastic weight cuts, because if we can manage how much is coming in and how much is going out, then all of a sudden we can say, okay, we know we don't have to starve ourselves. All right. So being able to be honest and actually measuring out food, especially when it's like you can measure out a cup, right? Most of it's like, all right, a cup of rice, or, this is at least pretty close to, you kind of say, hey, this is a cup of cooked chicken, or, pasta, or whatever it is. And we'll get into some of that. All right. The reason this is really important too, when we look at how much you eat, this is what happens when we eat. So this is the process. All right. So eat, digest, store. Okay. So when you eat, your body breaks down food, your blood sugar increases. Okay. So what happens when you eat is your stomach acid basically breaks down food, and your small intestine will start to put all that into your body's blood sugar. This triggers insulin. So if you have any diabetics, if you know a diabetic and all of a sudden like, yeah, I have an insulin pump, it's because their body doesn't produce insulin naturally, or doesn't produce it in high enough qualities to pack that away, right? So when we digest, what is actually happening is your body is taking those nutrients and packing it away, especially when it looks at blood sugar. All right. Insulin packs that away into muscle cells and then also into your liver. Okay. Blood sugar will start to drop. Now, this is really important when it comes to exercise in a second, and really practice and matches, because blood sugar will start to drop when we start to, when we have a high spike of insulin. All right. Now, when it stores food, so when insulin starts to pack away blood sugar, blood glucose or blood sugar gets stored as glycogen. Okay. And this is really important to understand here. Blood glucose gets stored as glycogen, and fatty acids or fat gets stored as fat. And that's really key to understand and really key to know, because when it comes to energy systems for wrestling, we need to know which are going to be very, very dominant and how it's going to play into how much energy they have on the mat. All right. So mentioned fat right there. So when we look at the three different, if you count water, there's technically a fourth macronutrient. Okay. But you're here, all these things are on every food label: carbohydrates, fat, and protein. Okay. Or carbs, fat, protein. These are the big three things we track in that calorie balance. Okay. So 1 gram of carbs is 4 calories. All right. And carbs, when they get broken down, turn into glycogen. So when we talk about the blood glucose, that's our carbs. Our carbs turn into blood glucose. Insulin puts it away as glycogen. All right. Fat is 1 gram is 9 calories. All right. Now that gets broken down into fatty acids, which get put down into fat stores. All right. Now you don't get to choose where the fat goes. Your body just stores it wherever it's going to decide to store it. That's genetic. All right. Protein is a 4 calories per gram, just like carbs are. Those get broken down into amino acids. All right. And if we actually were to look at the difference between carbs and protein, it's a nitrogen molecule. Okay. So we get into the chemistry, but we're going to say that you don't need to worry about that. What we really need to know is 1 gram of carbs is 4 calories. 1 gram of fat is 9. 1 gram of protein is 4. And when your body uses these things for energy, it uses them in that order. Carbs are the first thing we use for energy, then fat, then protein. And this is why it really ties into wrestling, because when we look at energy systems, there's 2 main dominant ones. Okay. And the first one is your aerobic energy system. All right. So basically, aerobic energy system uses oxygen, some blood glucose, and fat to produce energy. All right. This really only happens. I was talking to the UFC Performance Institute director, who kind of really taught me a lot of this stuff when it comes to grappling and wrestling and, any kind of combat sport. Is what we see is when we're on our feet in neutral position, it's very aerobic. Okay. Because you can breathe, you can move around, you can breathe. There's some space there. There's not a whole lot of pressure on your rib cage. You've got a lot of ability to use oxygen to create energy. When we get down to the mat, we get into referee's position. All right. Now, the big thing when we look at going back real quick to just neutral, when we look about fat burning zones, it takes 10 to 20 minutes to get into those. So unless you're super, super warmed up, you're not going to use a whole lot of fat during a match. All right. That's very important to note for when we talk about fat consumption. Referee's position, or at least down on the mat, if you take somebody down or you get taken down, the anaerobic energy system doesn't use oxygen. Okay. But it does use liver and muscle glycogen. So that's very important to understand. When we eat carbs, it turns into blood glucose, and insulin puts away as glycogen. That's the stores that your body is going to rely on when we're out on the mat. Okay. Because you got a 6-minute match. It's not 10 minutes. So it's not a whole lot of fat burning going on, but we do have a high amount of use of muscle and liver glycogen. All right. So this is also very important, because if you've got a wrestler with braces, or you're a wrestler with braces and you have to wear a mouth guard, that is a rule. All right. That is an NFHS rule. If you've got braces, you've got to have a top bottom mouth guard, and those breathing holes are not very big. So you're going to be in this anaerobic state the entire time. All right. Now, especially for a lot of parents, if you've never wrestled, and for a large amount of people, not actually been on the mat, wrestlers will tell you like they look okay on the mat, but you see them dying and they kind of feel like you kind of see them fading very quickly. A lot of times it's that anaerobic energy system doesn't have enough glycogen to withstand, which is why we're doing all these little talks on nutrition. Okay. So when we talk about actually managing calorie balance, and then we'll talk about, how much carbs, the first thing we need to do, going back to the beginning, calories in, calories out. So we need to track about 10 days. All right. And we want 10 days where we stay within like 3 to 4 pounds of ourselves. All right. So if we've got match days, and realistically, if you have like a 2-week time frame, we want to be able to track 14 days. That way we have about, 2 to 3 days, especially match days, that we can kind of cut out, because those aren't normal eating days because of matches, especially if we're having a hard time managing weight and all of a sudden somebody's not eating all day. All right. Some wrestlers know that feeling. If we can track over 10 days, we can average out the daily calories for those 10 days. All right. Assuming that we stay roughly the same weight. All right. Now, in that 10-day span, if you're actually measuring out and taking your weight each day, which you should, if you're noticing you're dropping weight over those 10 days, then we can kind of say, okay, we're looking at your calorie intake. You're putting out more than you're putting in. All right. So we know roughly calorie wise, that average is going to make you lose weight. Okay. Now, this is where it gets really, really important, especially when we talk about carbohydrates and fat and protein, especially when you look at the total number of calories you eat in a day. If you eat 55 to 65% of your calories in carbs, that's going to build up glycogen stores for when we're on the mat and when we're practicing, right? Because our body's going to rely on those glycogen stores during those matches, so then we can have energy on the mat. Okay. We want 10 to 15% in fat. And this is especially for those in between times. Fat has a couple different things that it really helps with. A lot of it actually has to tie in with your nervous system and your nerves. But then your heart also burns a good bit of fat. So being able to say we do want some fats, and we're going to talk about this in like food selection in another little video, but we want about 10 to 15% of those calories coming from fat and 25 to 35% from protein. Now, if you add these numbers up, if you add the top end up, right, 65, 15, and 35, you realize pretty quickly that that's 115%. So be aware, it might look, hey, I have 55% of my calories coming from carbs and 15% coming from fat and 30% coming from protein. Boom, there's 100% right there. All right. So being able to understand these are ranges, they're not very, they're not hard and strict, because if we add the very bottom end, 55, 10, and 20, we only get 85 grams, like 85% of our calories. If we look at 65, 15, and 35, we have 115%. All right. So know that these ranges we kind of have to modify, and it takes some time to learn how to adjust it. But once we can manage that nutrition the right way. So we're going to get into a different video here in a minute, but I'm going to split it into two: nutrition basics for wrestling and food selection, and how this all ties in, what foods to buy, or at least things to look at. And we're going to talk a little bit more about certain things in there. But for now, making sure we've got our calorie balance, making sure we can track our food and create an understanding of how much we need to eat, actually tracking it, and then understanding why those carbs are so important. And eating food is so important to fuel ourselves to perform best. Once we can understand that, then it will make food selection easy, and then it will make weight loss and weight management a lot easier for those days that we are competing and also trying to make a weight class. So there's just a little info for you on nutrition for wrestling.